The Sierra Grill buzzed with the midweek dinner rush. Waitstaff dashed between tables, balancing trays laden with sizzling steaks and fresh salads, while the kitchen clattered with the rhythm of knives against chopping boards and orders being shouted. For Megan, the chaos was routine, but tonight it grated on her nerves more than usual. She wiped her forehead with the back of her hand, adjusting her apron as she scanned the crowded dining area. "Megan, table 7 needs refills," her coworker Danny called out, motioning toward a family of 4 seated in the corner. Megan forced a tight smile and grabbed the pitcher of iced tea. She weaved through the tables, dodging a child who had dropped their crayon and nearly bumped into another server. "Here you go," Megan said briskly as she filled the glasses. The father murmured a distracted, "Thank you," not bothering to look up from his phone. Megan bit her tongue, suppressing the urge to point out his rudeness. Customers like him had drained her patience throughout the evening. She glanced at the clock. 2 hours until closing. 2 hours too long. As she turned toward the kitchen, Megan noticed a man walking into the restaurant. He appeared to be in his 80s, wearing a simple plaid shirt tucked into faded jeans and a well-worn cowboy hat. His slow, deliberate steps and calm demeanor made him stand out against the flurry of activity. Megan rolled her eyes. "Great," she muttered under her breath, "another table to deal with." The man stood at the entrance looking around the dining room as if taking in every detail. Megan waited for the host to seat him, but he simply gestured toward the counter seating. The man nodded and approached the counter, settling into a stool with an ease that suggested he had all the time in the world. "Megan," Denny whispered as he walked past, a grin tugging at his lips. "Doesn't he look familiar, like one of those old cowboy actors?" "Yeah, sure," Megan replied sarcastically. "Maybe he's Clint Eastwood." Danny chuckled. "I don't know, could be." Megan snorted and grabbed her notepad. She approached the counter with little enthusiasm, plastering on the bare minimum of a smile. The old man looked up as she arrived, his face lined but kind, his blue eyes sharp with quiet curiosity. "Good evening," he said, tipping his hat slightly. "How are you tonight?" "Fine," Megan replied curtly. "What can I get you?" The man paused, scanning the menu before him. "Well, I reckon I'll start with a coffee, black, no sugar. And let's see, what do you recommend?" Megan resisted the urge to sigh. "The steak's popular." "What'll do," the man said with a nod. "Medium rare, please." She jotted down the order and turned away without another word. Back in the kitchen, she placed the ticket on the line and grabbed a cup for the coffee. Danny was nearby, sneaking glances at the man. "Seriously, Megan, he looks so familiar. You don't think—" "Danny," Megan interrupted, her patience thinning. "He's just another customer, let it go." Danny shrugged, but the curiosity didn't leave his face. As the evening wore on, Megan couldn't help but notice how different the man was from the other patrons. He sat quietly sipping his coffee and watching the restaurant with an expression of contentment. When his steak arrived, he thanked her politely and began eating without complaint. No special requests, no snapping fingers for her attention, just a quiet, unassuming presence. Yet, something about his calmness irritated Megan. She was used to dealing with demanding customers, the kind who barked orders or criticized everything from the food to the service. But this man, this quiet, polite man, felt like an anomaly, and she didn't know how to handle it. When she brought his check, she couldn't resist making a snide comment. "Must be nice to sit back and relax while the rest of us are running around like crazy?" The man raised an eyebrow, his fork pausing midair. "It is nice," he said simply, "but I'd reckon it's not much fun for you." Megan blinked, caught off guard by his response. She quickly recovered, handing him the bill. "Enjoy the rest of your evening." As she walked away, she muttered under her breath, "Probably came in here to waste time." Unbeknownst to Megan, the man heard every word. By the time the restaurant emptied out, Megan was exhausted. She leaned against the counter, rubbing her temples as Danny finished wiping down tables. "Rough night?" he asked. "Same as always," Megan replied. "Rude customers, bad tips, and now some old guy who probably thinks he's a cowboy." Danny smirked. "That old guy left you a tip." Megan frowned. "What?" "He paid at the counter." "Check your apron." Curious, Megan reached into her pocket and pulled out a crisp $50 bill. Her mouth fell open. "He left this?" Danny nodded. "Yup. Guess he appreciated the steak." Megan stared at the bill, a pang of guilt creeping into her chest. She had dismissed the man, judged him without a second thought, and yet he had shown her nothing but kindness. "Maybe he's just generous," she muttered, though the words felt hollow. As Megan locked up and headed home, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the man than she had realized. Something about his presence lingered in her mind, like the faint echo of a song she couldn't quite place. Little did she know, her next encounter with him would change everything. The following evening at Sierra Grill began as uneventfully as any other night. Megan tied her apron and took her station by the counter, scanning the floor as the familiar chaos of the dinner rush set in. She tried to focus on her tasks, but the image of the elderly man from the previous night lingered in her mind. The generous tip, his calm demeanor, and the slight smile he had given her as he left, it all felt out of place in her otherwise frustrating routine. "Megan, table 3 is asking for more bread," Danny called out from across the room, breaking her thoughts. She grabbed a basket of warm rolls and headed toward the table. Just another night, she told herself. Another exhausting shift. Yet, as she turned back toward the counter, her heart skipped a beat. There he was again. The elderly man had returned, dressed in the same simple plaid shirt and worn jeans, his cowboy hat perched neatly on his head. "You've got to be kidding me," Megan muttered under her breath. She braced herself as he approached the counter and took the same stool as before. This time his smile seemed a little wider, as though he knew she had been thinking about him. "Evening," he said, tipping his hat once more. "Looks like I picked the right place again." Megan forced a polite smile. "Welcome back. Coffee and steak, I assume?" "That'd be mighty fine," the man replied, his tone easy and warm. She jotted down his order and headed to the kitchen, trying to ignore Danny, who was openly watching the man with curiosity. "Still think he's just some regular guy?" Danny teased. "Danny, drop it," Megan snapped, placing the order on the kitchen line. But as she poured the man's coffee, she couldn't deny that there was something different about him. He didn't seem like a drifter or a tourist. He carried himself with quiet confidence, the kind that suggested he had seen and done far more in life than he let on. As Megan set his coffee on the counter, she decided to break the silence. "So, what brings you back here? 2 nights in a row seems like a lot for a place like this." The man chuckled softly, wrapping his hands around the coffee cup. "I reckon the steak was good enough to warrant a return visit, and I like the atmosphere. Reminds me of simpler times." "Must be nice," Megan replied, her voice tinged with sarcasm, "sitting back and reminiscing while the rest of us are on our feet all night." The man studied her for a moment, his blue eyes sharp but kind. "You've got a sharp tongue, miss, but I don't mind. I figure you've had a rough go of it." Megan's cheeks flushed. She wasn't used to customers seeing past her practiced smile and weary demeanor. "It's just a job," she said quickly, brushing off his comment. "Nothing special." "Every job's special if you do it with the right heart," he said, taking a sip of his coffee. Megan frowned, unsure how to respond. Before she could say anything else, the man shifted the conversation. "How long you been working here?" "About a year," she replied. "Feels like 10. He nodded thoughtfully. "And what keeps you here?" "The paycheck," Megan said bluntly. "What else?" The man smiled faintly but didn't press further. Megan felt a strange sense of unease, as though he could see right through her defenses. She busied herself by wiping down the counter, eager to escape the conversation, but as she worked, she noticed something peculiar. The man wasn't just sitting idly. His gaze moved around the restaurant, observing the staff, the customers, and even the decor. It was as though he were studying the place, taking in every detail. Danny leaned in beside her. "You know, he tipped me $50 last night," he whispered. "What?" Megan stared at him. "He gave you 50 too?" Danny nodded. "Guess he's just generous." Megan glanced at the man, who was now eating his steak with the same calm precision as before. Who was this guy, and why did he keep coming back? Later that evening, as the dinner rush subsided, the man lingered at the counter, nursing a second cup of coffee. Megan approached to clear his plate. "You're awfully quiet tonight," she remarked, trying to mask her curiosity. "Just thinking," he replied. "This place has changed a bit since the last time I was here." Megan raised an eyebrow. "You've been here before?" "Once or twice," he said with a small smile. "Long time ago, though." Before Megan could ask him to elaborate, Carol, the restaurant's manager, walked in from the back office. Her eyes landed on the man, and her expression immediately shifted to one of surprise and recognition. "Mr. Eastwood," she said, her voice tinged with disbelief. Megan froze. "Mr. Eastwood?" The man turned toward Carol, tipping his hat. "Good to see you again, Carol. How's the place holding up?" Carol approached the counter, her demeanor suddenly respectful and slightly nervous. It's doing well, sir. We've had a good run this past year." Megan's jaw dropped. "Wait, Clint Eastwood? As in, the Clint Eastwood?" The man chuckled, his blue eyes twinkling with amusement. That'd be me. Megan felt her stomach drop. All the dismissive comments, the sarcasm, the judgment, it all came rushing back. She had insulted Clint Eastwood, one of the most iconic figures in Hollywood and, apparently, the owner of Sierra Grill. I didn't know," Megan stammered, her face flushing with embarrassment. "Don't worry," Clint said, his tone as calm as ever. "You're not the first to judge a book by its cover, and I reckon you won't be the last." Carol turned to Megan, her expression a mix of shock and disapproval. "Megan, you—" "It's all right, Carol," Clint interrupted gently. "I think Megan and I have more to discuss." Megan swallowed hard, her heart racing. Whatever Clint Eastwood had to say next, she knew it was going to stay with her for a long time. Megan's hands fidgeted nervously as Clint Eastwood, sipped his coffee with a calm demeanor. Carol, the manager, had retreated to the office, clearly shaken by the unexpected visit from the restaurant's owner. Megan, however, was left standing by the counter, her face flushed with embarrassment and her mind racing. I'm so sorry, Mr. Eastwood," Megan finally managed to say. "I didn't know who you were. If I'd known—" Clint held up a hand, silencing her. "Megan, stop right there. If you'd known, you would have acted differently. Is that what you're saying?" Megan opened her mouth to respond, but the words caught in her throat. He wasn't wrong. If she'd known he owned the place, or was a Hollywood legend, she would have gone out of her way to serve him better. But now that he was calling her out on it, the realization stung. "I guess," she began, her voice trailing off, "I just didn't expect me to walk in looking like this," Clint finished for her, gesturing to his plaid shirt and jeans. "That's the point, isn't it?" Megan blinked, unsure how to answer. Clint leaned back slightly, his expression still calm but his eyes sharp. "You see, Megan, the thing about people is they're quick to judge. Doesn't matter who you are or what you've done, they take one look at you and decide everything they think they need to know." Megan shifted uncomfortably, her gaze dropping to the counter. "I didn't mean to be rude," she said softly. "It's just, this job can be tough. Long hours, rude customers. It's hard not to get frustrated." Clint nodded slowly. "I get that. Life can be frustrating, but that doesn't mean you take it out on the people around you. Everyone's carrying something, Megan. You never know what someone's been through or what they're dealing with." Megan glanced up at him, her eyes searching his face for any hint of condescension, but there was none. His words, though firm, were filled with understanding, and that only made her feel worse. She had judged him, dismissed him, and treated him poorly, all because she thought he was just some ordinary guy. "I'm really sorry," Megan said again, her voice more earnest this time. "You're right, I shouldn't have acted the way I did." Clint gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod, apology accepted. "But the question is, what are you going to do about it?" Megan frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" "You apologized," Clint said. "That's a good start. But it's not enough to just say sorry. Change comes from what you do next." Megan felt a lump form in her throat. She knew he was right, but the truth of it was hard to swallow. She thought back to all the times she'd been short with customers, the moments she'd rolled her eyes or muttered under her breath. It wasn't just Clint Eastwood she owed an apology to. It was everyone she'd ever dismissed or judged unfairly. For the rest of the evening, Megan couldn't stop thinking about Clint's words. As she served other customers, she made a conscious effort to be kinder, more patient. When a frazzled mother with 2 young kids spilled a glass of water, Megan didn't sigh or roll her eyes as she might have before. Instead, she grabbed a towel and helped clean up the mess, offering the woman a reassuring smile. "Thank you," the mother said, looking genuinely grateful. "You've been so sweet. I was worried this would ruin our meal." "No problem at all," Megan replied, and for the first time in a long time she actually meant it. Danny noticed the change and raised an eyebrow as they crossed paths near the kitchen. "What's gotten into you?" he teased. "Did Eastwood give you a pep talk or something?" Megan shot him a look but couldn't help smiling. "Something like that." As closing time approached, Clint remained at the counter, his coffee cup long since empty. Megan approached hesitantly, unsure if he wanted anything else or if he was simply observing the restaurant. Before she could speak, Clint glanced up at her. "You handled yourself well tonight," he said. Megan's cheeks flushed. "Thank you. I'm trying." Clint nodded. "That's all anyone can ask. No one's perfect, Megan, but it's what we do after we recognize our flaws that matters." Megan hesitated, then asked the question that had been nagging at her all evening. "Why did you come here tonight? Was it just to check on the restaurant?" Clint chuckled softly. "Partly, but mostly I wanted to see how people are treated when they walk through those doors." Megan frowned. What do you mean? You'd be surprised how many businesses forget the basics, Clint said. Treat people with respect, show them kindness, make them feel valued. That's what keeps a place like this running. Megan thought about his words, about how she'd been treating customers, about how she'd treated him. She felt a pang of guilt all over again, but Clint's calm expression reminded her that guilt wasn't the point. Change was. You've got potential, Megan, Clint said, his tone encouraging. You're young, smart, and capable. Don't waste it by letting frustration get the better of you. Megan nodded, her resolve strengthening. I won't. Good, Clint stood, placing a generous tip on the counter. And remember, kindness doesn't cost a thing. With that, he tipped his hat and walked toward the door. Megan watched him leave, feeling a strange mix of relief and inspiration. She knew she still had a lot to learn, but for the first time in a long time, she felt ready to face the challenge. Megan woke up the next morning with Clint's words still echoing in her mind. Kindness doesn't cost a thing. She couldn't shake the feeling that their encounter wasn't just a coincidence. It felt like a wake-up call, a push to reevaluate how she approached her job and, more importantly, how she treated people. As she walked to work, Megan found herself replaying moments from the previous night, her sarcastic comments, her quick judgments, and how easily frustration had bubbled to the surface. She cringed at the memory of dismissing Clint Eastwood, thinking he was just another old man with too many questions and too little money. She had been so wrong. By the time she reached the restaurant, Megan was determined to do better. As she tied on her apron and clocked in, she noticed Danny leaning against the counter scrolling on his phone. He looked up and grinned. Ready for another round of chaos? He teased. Megan smiled faintly. Actually, yeah, I think I am. The lunch rush hit fast and hard, as it always did. The line at the door snaked out into the parking lot, and every table was packed with customers. Megan darted from table to table, taking orders and balancing trays, but this time, she approached her work with a different mindset. When a group of loud businessmen snapped their fingers to get her attention, Megan resisted the urge to roll her eyes. Instead, she walked over with a polite smile. Good afternoon, gentlemen. What can I get for you? Beer. One of the men raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by her friendly tone. I'll take the Sierra Burger, medium rare, and a side of fries. Great choice, Megan said, jotting it down. She turned to the others. And for the rest of you? As she moved through the room, Megan noticed that her shift felt different. Customers responded positively to her efforts, and even the more difficult ones seemed slightly less aggravating. It was as if her change in attitude had a ripple effect, making the atmosphere in the restaurant lighter and more pleasant. Danny noticed, too. At one point he leaned in while they were both grabbing refills in the kitchen. Who are you and what have you done with Megan? Megan laughed, shaking her head. I just realized I've been looking at this job the wrong way. Danny raised an eyebrow. Oh? Do tell. It's not just about the paycheck, Megan said, her voice thoughtful. It's about the people. Everyone who walks through those doors has their own story, their own struggles. Who am I to make their day worse? Danny stared at her for a moment before breaking into a grin. Well, look at you, turning into a philosopher and everything. Shut up, Megan said, but she was smiling. The afternoon wore on and the pace of the restaurant began to slow. Megan took a moment to catch her breath, leaning against the counter as she sipped a glass of water. Carol, the manager, approached her with a curious expression. Megan, can I talk to you for a second? Carol asked. Megan straightened, suddenly nervous. Of course, is everything okay? Carol nodded and gestured for Megan to follow her into the office. Once the door was closed, Carol leaned against the desk, her arms crossed. I wanted to tell you that I've noticed a change in you today. Megan's heart sank. I know I haven't been the best employee lately, but I'm really trying to do better. Relax, Carol interrupted, holding up a hand. That's exactly what I wanted to talk about. You have been doing better. The way you handled that lunch rush, it was impressive. Customers were happy and I didn't hear a single complaint about your attitude. Megan blinked, caught off guard by the praise. Oh. Thank you. I don't know what sparked the change, Carol continued, but keep it up, it's making a difference. Megan smiled, a flicker of pride warming her chest. I will, thanks, Carol. As Megan left the office and returned to the dining area, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. Clint's words had planted a seed, and now it was starting to grow. Later that evening, Megan stayed late to clean up after the dinner rush. The restaurant was quiet now, the only sounds coming from the clinking of dishes and the hum of the dishwasher. Megan wiped down tables with a calm focus, her movements unhurried. Danny popped his head out from the kitchen, grinning. You're still here? Go home, overachiever. Is finishing up, Megan said, rolling her eyes but smiling. Go ahead, I'll lock up. Do yourself, Danny said, tossing her the keys. See you tomorrow. As the door swung shut behind him, Megan took a deep breath and looked around the empty restaurant. It was hard to believe how much her perspective had shifted in just 24 hours. She felt lighter, freer, like a weight she hadn't even realized she was carrying had been lifted. She thought about Clint Eastwood again, about the way he'd spoken to her. Not with anger or condescension, but with quiet wisdom and a genuine desire to see her do better. His calm demeanor had been a stark contrast to her own frazzled impatience, and it had left a lasting impression. Megan made a silent promise to herself. She would keep growing, keep striving to be better, not just for her customers, but for herself. As she turned off the lights and locked the door behind her, Megan stepped out into the cool night air with a small smile on her face. This was just the beginning, and she was ready for whatever came next. The next morning, Megan arrived at the restaurant with a renewed sense of purpose. The memory of Clint Eastwood's calm, piercing gaze lingered in her mind, serving as both a motivator and a reminder of the changes she wanted to make. She stepped through the doors of Sierra Grill just as the first rays of sunlight began streaming through the windows, casting a warm glow over the dining area. Carol, the manager, was already there, jotting notes on her clipboard. She looked up and smiled when she saw Megan. Early again? Who are you, and what have you done with the Megan I know? Megan chuckled, her cheeks flushing slightly. I guess I'm just trying to be better. Carol nodded approvingly. Well, it's working, keep it up. As the morning rush began, Megan found herself faced with a diverse group of customers, each with their own quirks, requests, and occasionally challenges. There was the elderly man who always ordered his eggs over easy but sent them back if they weren't just right. There was the young mother juggling two rambunctious toddlers who spilled syrup all over the table. And then there was the group of construction workers, loud and boisterous, with a complicated order that took several trips to the kitchen. Under normal circumstances, Megan might have let her frustration get the best of her. She might have rolled her eyes or sighed loudly, making her irritation obvious to everyone around her. But today, she approached each situation with patience and a genuine desire to help. When the elderly man grumbled about his eggs, Megan smiled and said, "No problem, sir. Let me get this fixed for you right away." When the young mother apologized profusely for the mess, Megan reassured her, "Don't worry about it. I've got two nieces who could give your kids a run for their money." And when the construction workers joked about being high minimal, Megan laughed and replied, "Hey, as long as you're happy, I'm happy." By the time the morning rush ended, Megan was tired but oddly content. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she had made a positive impact on the people she served. The smiles, the thank yous, and even the little moments of connection had made the hard work feel worthwhile. Around lunchtime, Danny sidled up to her with a curious expression. "All right, I have to ask, what's gotten into you? You're like a completely different person lately." Megan hesitated, wiping her hands on her apron. She wasn't sure how to explain the shift in her mindset without sounding overly dramatic. Finally, she said, "Let's just say I had a wake-up call. Someone reminded me that how you treat people matters." Danny raised an eyebrow. "And who's this wise philosopher?" Megan shrugged, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Just someone who knows a thing or two about life." Danny smirked. "Mysterious, I like it." As the afternoon wore on, Megan found herself thinking more and more about Clint Eastwood. She wondered if he had noticed the changes she was trying to make. Would he even come back to the restaurant? And if he did, what would he think of her now? Her thoughts were interrupted by Carol, who approached her with a thoughtful look. "Megan, I've been watching you these past few days, and I have to say, I'm impressed." Megan blinked in surprise. "Really?" Carol nodded. "The way you've been handling customers? It's a complete turnaround from where you were a week ago. Whatever sparked this change, it's made a difference." "Thank you," Megan said, feeling a warm flush of pride. "I guess I just realized I needed to adjust my attitude." Carol smiled. "Well, it's paying off. Keep it up." Later that evening, as Megan was finishing up her shift, she noticed a familiar figure walking through the door. Her breath caught in her throat. It was Clint Eastwood. Dressed in his usual unassuming attire, a crisp button-up shirt and well-worn boots, he carried himself with the same calm confidence that had left such a strong impression on Megan. He glanced around the restaurant, his sharp eyes taking in the bustling activity before settling into a booth near the window. Megan hesitated for a moment, her heart pounding, then, summoning her courage, she approached his table with a smile. "Good evening, sir," she said, her voice steady despite her nerves. "What can I get for you tonight?" Clint looked up at her, his piercing gaze softening as he recognized her. "Well, if it isn't Megan," he said with a faint smile. "I was wondering if you'd still be here." Megan felt a mixture of relief and curiosity. "Of course, what brings you back?" Clint leaned back in his seat, his expression thoughtful. "I had a feeling I should stop by. Wanted to see how things were going." Megan nodded, her cheeks flushing. "Well, I hope you'll notice a difference. I've been trying to do better." Clint studied her for a moment, then nodded. "I can see that. And let me tell you, it shows." Megan felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. "Thank you. That means a lot." Clint ordered a simple meal, a steak and mashed potatoes, and Megan made sure it was prepared perfectly. As she served him, she couldn't help but feel a sense of pride in how far she had come. When Clint finished his meal, he left a generous tip on the table and stood to leave. Before he walked out, he turned to Megan and said, "Remember, kindness goes a long way. Keep that in mind and you'll do just fine." Megan nodded, her smile widening. "I will, thank you, for everything." As Clint walked out into the night, Megan felt a sense of closure and a newfound determination to keep growing, both as a person and as a professional. The following morning, Megan woke up with a fresh sense of determination. Her interaction with Clint the previous evening had left her feeling not just validated but genuinely inspired. For the first time, she began to see her role at Sierra Grill as more than just a job. It was an opportunity, a chance to make people's days brighter, even in small ways. The lesson Clint had taught her about kindness and humility resonated deeply, and Megan felt ready to embody those principles fully. Arriving at the restaurant early, she decided to take some time to observe the space around her. The clatter of dishes in the kitchen, the warm hum of conversation among early diners, and the aroma of fresh coffee brewing, all of it felt different now, more meaningful. For the first time, she saw Sierra Grill not just as a workplace, but as a living, breathing community. Danny was setting up tables when he noticed Megan's thoughtful expression. "You're really leaning into this new vibe of yours, huh?" he teased, his tone light but curious. Megan smiled, grabbing a cloth to wipe down one of the counters. "What can I say? Turns out being a decent person isn't so bad." Danny chuckled, shaking his head. "You're a whole new person, Megan. I gotta admit it's kind of weird, but in a good way." The morning shift passed smoothly, with Megan making a conscious effort to go above and beyond for her customers. She greeted each table with genuine warmth, took the time to listen to special requests, and even managed to diffuse a minor complaint from a particularly picky diner with patience and grace. Around lunchtime, an older couple entered the restaurant. They looked a little lost, glancing around uncertainly as they tried to find a table. Megan noticed them immediately and stepped forward with a welcoming smile. "Hi there," she said gently. "Can I help you find a seat?" The woman smiled back, visibly relieved. "Oh, thank you, dear. We're not used to coming out to places like this. It's been a while." "Well, you're in the right place," Megan said, leading them to a cozy booth near the window. "Take your time with the menu, and if you have any questions, just let me know." As the couple settled in, Megan took their orders and made sure to check on them frequently throughout their meal. By the time they finished, they were glowing with appreciation. "You've been so kind to us," the man said as Megan cleared their plates. "It's rare to find service like this these days." Megan felt a warm flush of pride. "Thank you, that means a lot to me." Later that afternoon, Carol pulled Megan aside, her expression a mix of curiosity and approval. "I've been getting a lot of compliments about you lately," she said. "What's going on, Megan? You've turned things around so fast, it's like you're a completely different person." Megan hesitated, feeling a little embarrassed. "I guess I just had a wake-up call. Someone reminded me why treating people with respect matters." Carol studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Whatever it was, it's working. Keep it up. You're setting a great example for the rest of the team." The words filled Megan with a sense of accomplishment she hadn't felt in a long time. She realized that her transformation wasn't just benefiting her, it was influencing the people around her too. That evening, Megan stayed behind after her shift to help clean up. As she wiped down the tables and stacked chairs, she found herself reflecting on how much her attitude had changed in such a short time. She thought about Clint Eastwood's calm yet firm demeanor, his ability to command respect without ever raising his voice. His lesson had been simple but profound. Kindness wasn't a weakness, it was a strength. Just as Megan was finishing up, the door to the restaurant swung open. She turned to see Carol walking in, holding an envelope in her hand. "Megan," Carol said, her tone serious but kind. "I wanted to give you this." Megan took the envelope, her brow furrowed in confusion. Inside was a handwritten note. "Megan, your hard work, patience, and newfound sense of purpose haven't gone unnoticed. Keep pushing yourself to be the best version of you and you'll go far. Thank you for reminding us all why this place exists, to bring people together. Clint Eastwood. Megan's eyes widened as she read the note, her heart swelled with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. "He left this for me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Carol nodded. "He dropped it off earlier today. He didn't stay long, but he asked me to make sure you got it." Megan clutched the note tightly, her mind racing. She had no idea that Clint had been watching her progress so closely, and the fact that he had taken the time to acknowledge her growth meant more than she could put into words. That night, as Megan walked home, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. The stars above seemed brighter, the air crisper. She realized that her transformation wasn't just about being a better waitress, it was about being a better person. As she reached her apartment, she tucked Clint's note into a small box where she kept her most cherished belongings. It wasn't just a piece of paper, it was a reminder of how far she had come, and how much further she could go. Megan lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling and smiling to herself. She had found something she hadn't even known she was looking for, a sense of fulfillment, a sense of pride, and a sense of connection to the people around her. And this was only the beginning. The following week at Sierra Grill felt like a fresh chapter for Megan. Customers had begun to notice the change in her demeanor, and their positive feedback continued to pour in. Carol often smiled as she overheard comments from diners praising Megan's kindness and attentiveness. Even her coworkers seemed more upbeat, inspired by the noticeable shift in her energy. Danny in particular enjoyed teasing her about her newfound positivity. "Who are you, and what have you done with the old Megan?" he joked one afternoon as they worked the lunch rush. Megan rolled her eyes playfully. "Don't get used to it, Danny. I'm still capable of being sarcastic." "Sure," he smirked, "but admit it, you're actually enjoying yourself now." Megan paused, thinking about his words. "You know what? I am. Turns out being nice to people makes the job way less stressful. Who knew?" Later that evening, Megan noticed a family sitting in one of her booths. The parents looked exhausted, their young children fidgeting restlessly in their seats. The mother's frazzled expression reminded Megan of how her own mom used to look after long days at work. As she approached the table, Megan greeted them warmly. "Hi everyone, can I get you started with some drinks? Maybe a chocolate milk for the little guy?" she asked, pointing to the youngest child. The boy's eyes lit up. "Chocolate milk, please." His mother smiled gratefully. "Thank you, that would be perfect." Megan quickly brought their drinks and took their orders, making a special effort to engage with the children while ensuring the parents felt relaxed. She even brought the kids a small plate of fries to snack on while they waited for their meals. By the time the family finished dinner, the parents looked visibly more at ease. As they prepared to leave, the father handed Megan a generous tip along with a heartfelt thank you. "You don't know how much we needed this tonight," he said. "You were wonderful." Megan felt a lump in her throat as she watched them leave. Moments like this reminded her why Clint's lesson had been so important. Being kind and attentive didn't just make her job easier, it had the power to make someone's day better. The next morning, Megan arrived at work early to prepare for another busy day. She had begun to take pride in her role, finding joy in the little things that used to irritate her. She greeted every customer with a smile, and her coworkers had noticed her newfound willingness to lend a hand when needed. As Megan set up the coffee station, Carol approached her with a clipboard in hand. "Megan, do you have a minute?" "Of course," Megan said, turning to face her manager. Carol glanced at the clipboard, then back at Megan. "I wanted to talk to you about something. Clint stopped by yesterday and we had a conversation about you." Megan's stomach fluttered. "Oh?" "He said he's been keeping an eye on your progress and was impressed by how much you've grown," Carol continued. "He thinks you have potential to take on more responsibility here." Megan blinked, surprised. "Responsibility? Like what?" Carol smiled. "How would you feel about training as a shift lead? It would mean overseeing the team during your shifts and helping me with some managerial tasks." For a moment, Megan was speechless. She had never considered herself leadership material, but the idea filled her with a sense of pride and excitement. "I'd love to," she said finally. "Thank you, Carol." "Don't thank me," Carol said. "Thank Clint, he's the one who saw your potential before anyone else." Megan threw herself into her new role with enthusiasm, determined to prove Clint and Carol right. She took the time to learn everything she could about managing the restaurant, from scheduling shifts to handling customer complaints. Her coworkers were surprised by her sudden rise but couldn't deny that she had earned it. Danny, of course, couldn't resist teasing her. "So you're the boss now, huh?" he said one afternoon, raising an eyebrow. "Does this mean I have to call you ma'am?" Only if you want to, Megan replied with a grin. But don't think I'll go easy on you just because we're friends. As the weeks went by, Megan's confidence grew. She became a source of support for her team, always willing to step in and help when things got hectic. Her transformation inspired others to approach their work with a more positive attitude, and the overall atmosphere at Sierra Grill began to improve. One afternoon, as Megan was organizing the schedule in the back office, she heard Carol's voice calling her from the front. "Megan, you've got a visitor." Curious, Megan stepped out into the dining area and froze when she saw who was waiting for her. Clint Eastwood stood near the entrance, his presence as calm and commanding as ever. "Mr. Eastwood," Megan said, her heart pounding. "What a surprise." Clint smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "I just came to see how you've been doing." Megan felt a rush of gratitude. "Things have been going great, thank you for believing in me. I don't think I'd have come this far without your advice." Clint nodded thoughtfully. "You didn't need me to believe in you, Megan. You just needed to believe in yourself. I'm glad you've found your footing." Megan hesitated, then said, "Can I ask you something? Why did you decide to teach me that lesson instead of just walking away?" Clint's expression softened. "Because I've learned that sometimes people just need a nudge in the right direction, and I saw potential in you even if you didn't see it in yourself." His words filled Megan with a sense of pride she hadn't felt in years. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady, "for everything." Clint gave her a small nod. "Keep it up, Megan, you're doing great." As he turned to leave, Megan watched him go, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. Clint's belief in her had sparked a transformation she hadn't known she was capable of, and she was determined to keep growing. That evening, as she locked up the restaurant, Megan reflected on how much her life had changed in just a few short months. She had gone from a frustrated waitress to a respected leader, all because someone had reminded her of the power of kindness and humility. Megan smiled to herself, knowing that the journey wasn't over. There was still so much to learn, so many ways to grow, but for the first time in a long time she felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. As the days turned into weeks, Megan's transformation at Sierra Grill continued to ripple through the restaurant. Customers who had once viewed the service as passable now praised the warm and inviting atmosphere, attributing much of the change to Megan's leadership. Her co-workers, even the skeptics like Danny, had grown to respect her. She had become the glue that held the team together, balancing authority with empathy. One Friday evening, the dinner rush was in full swing. Every table was occupied and the kitchen buzzed with activity. Megan moved seamlessly between helping customers, assisting in the kitchen, and supporting her team on the floor. She had learned how to anticipate problems before they arose and address them with confidence. "Table 5 needs extra napkins," Danny called as he passed her. "On it," Megan replied, grabbing a handful and heading to the table. A middle-aged man at the table smiled as she approached. "Thank you, Megan," he said, reading her name tag. "This place feels so different lately. You're doing a great job." "Thank you for saying that," Megan replied warmly. "We're glad to have you here." As she walked back toward the kitchen, she spotted Carol standing by the counter with a clipboard. Carol caught Megan's eye and motioned for her to come over. "How's it going?" Carol asked. "Busy but good," Megan replied. "What's up?" "I wanted to let you know Clint stopped by earlier today," Carol said, lowering her voice. "He wanted to check in on how things are going." Megan's heart skipped a beat. "I didn't see him." "He didn't stay long," Carol explained, "but he left a message for you." Megan tilted her head curiously. "A message?" Carol smiled. He said, "Tell Megan I'm proud of her. She's turned this place into something special." Megan felt a lump form in her throat. Clint's words carried more weight than he could have known. "That means a lot," she said softly. "Thanks for telling me." Carol patted her shoulder. "You've earned it, Megan. Keep doing what you're doing." That night, after the last table was cleared and the chairs were stacked, Megan lingered in the restaurant, reflecting on everything that had happened since Clint's first visit. She remembered how frustrated and lost she had felt that day, how her impatience and negativity had clouded her perspective. Now she could hardly recognize that version of herself. As she wiped down the counters, Danny approached, his usual smirk replaced with a more serious expression. "You're staying late again?" he asked. "Just finishing up," Megan replied. "Why?" Danny shrugged. "I don't know, it's just, you're different now, in a good way." Megan laughed lightly. "That's the nicest thing you've ever said to me." "I mean it," Danny said, his tone sincere. "You've made this place better. I think Clint knew you would." Megan paused, letting his words sink in. Thanks, Danny, that means a lot. As Danny grabbed his bag and headed for the door, he called back, "Don't stay too late, boss." Megan smiled and returned to her task, feeling a sense of contentment she hadn't experienced in a long time. The following week, Clint Eastwood made another unannounced visit to Sierra Grill. This time, Megan was ready. She greeted him warmly as he walked through the door, his presence as commanding as ever. "Mr. Eastwood," she said, extending her hand, "it's good to see you again." Clint shook her hand, a small smile playing at his lips. "Megan," he said, "I've heard nothing but good things." "Thank you," she replied. "I've been trying to live up to your advice." "You've done more than that," Clint said, his voice steady. "You've taken it to heart. This place feels like it's thriving, and that's because of you." Megan felt a swell of pride but remained humble. "I couldn't have done it without the team," she said, "and without your trust." Clint nodded, his gaze thoughtful. "It's rare to see someone take criticism and turn it into something positive. That's a strength most people don't have." "I guess I just needed the right push," Megan admitted. Clint chuckled. "Sometimes, that's all it takes." As they spoke, Carol joined them, her expression bright. "Mr. Eastwood, it's always a pleasure," she said. "We've been so proud of Megan's progress." "I can see why," Clint replied. "She's set the standard for what this place should be." After Clint left, Megan found herself reflecting on his words once again. She realized that his lesson wasn't just about being a better waitress or manager, it was about being a better person. She had learned to see beyond her own frustrations and recognize the value of treating others with kindness and respect, even on the toughest days. As the weeks turned into months, Megan continued to grow in her role. The restaurant flourished under her leadership, and the team became more cohesive than ever. Customers returned not just for the food but for the welcoming atmosphere that Megan had worked so hard to create. One evening, as she closed up the restaurant, Megan stood at the door and looked out at the quiet street. She thought about where she had started and how far she had come. Clint's words echoed in her mind, "You just needed to believe in yourself." Megan smiled, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. She knew there would always be challenges, but she was ready to face them head-on, armed with the lessons she had learned. And as she locked the door and walked into the night, she felt a renewed sense of purpose, a reminder that sometimes the smallest moments could lead to the greatest transformations. What would you have done in Megan's shoes? Share your thoughts below, and for more inspiring stories like this, make sure to subscribe. Thank you for being a part of this journey. Until next time.